Commander Dexel raised his hand to give the order that would end the human ship forever. "Fire on my..." He stopped as his sensor officer shouted in alarm. "Commander, hyperspace disturbance detected. Multiple signatures emerging at coordinates 7-7-Mark-4. It is a fleet. No. Wait. Multiple fleets." The first ships dropped out of hyperspace directly between the Lorith Formation and the crippled Eternal Defiance 12. Kolvani destroyers with their distinctive golden hulls and energy lances already powering up. Behind them came 28 Thesan cruisers, their organic-looking vessels bristling with plasma cannons. Then 41 Bryn frigates in tight formation, their crimson war paint gleaming under the light of distant stars. Dexel stared at his tactical display with disbelief as more signatures continued to appear. Where are they coming from? He demanded. Who called them? Who organized this? His officers had no answers because there were no answers to give. No one had called these ships. No one had organized them. They had simply come. 17 Yenari battlecruisers emerged from hyperspace with weapons hot. 33 Koth gunboats followed, their small frames packed with devastating firepower. 22 Malachi carriers launched fighters even as they completed their transition to normal space. Species that had never fought together, that had no treaties or alliances, that spoke different languages and followed different codes. They formed battle lines as if they had trained for this moment their entire lives. Dexel's communication officer turned to him with a pale face. "Commander, they are hailing us," she said. "All of them. On the same frequency. What do they want?" Dexel snapped. "Put them through." The main screen split into dozens of smaller images, each showing the face of a different alien commander, a Corvani admiral. With 4 eyes blazing with righteous fury, a Thesan engineer turned warrior. Her tentacles gripping the arms of her command chair, a Bryn ambassador who had exchanged his diplomatic robes for battle armor, and dozens more, representing species that the Varth had conquered, and species that the Varth had ignored, and species that the Vorith had never even encountered. Commander Dexel of the Vorith Dominion. The Corvani admiral said, "I am High Admiral Zeth of the Corvani Defense Fleet. You are ordered to stand down and withdraw from this system immediately." Dexel found his voice through his shock. "On whose authority do you make this demand?" He asked. "You have no jurisdiction here. The Miral are not your allies. The humans are not your responsibility. By what right do you interfere in Dominion conquests?" Admiral Zeth smiled, and it was not a friendly expression. "By the right of memory," he said. "By the right of debt unpaid. By the right of conscience that will no longer stay silent." The other commanders added their voices in agreement. 40 years ago, humans saved my people from plague," Zeth continued. "They asked nothing in return except that we remember." "Well?" "Commander, we remember. We remember everything." More ships continued to arrive as he spoke, the counter on. Dexel's tactical display climbed past 200 and kept rising. 230 vessels from 18 different species, 260 vessels from 22 species, 300 ships, then 310. And still they came. Dexel looked at his own advanced fleet of 23 vessels and felt something he had never experienced in his centuries of conquest. Fear. "You would start a war over this?" he said. "You would? Tear the galaxy apart for one ship? For one species? For humans?" The Bryn ambassador stepped forward on his screen. "You do not understand." "Commander," he said, "we are not starting anything. We are ending something. We are ending the silence. We are ending the cowardice. We are ending the lie that strength means watching others suffer." Dexel opened his mouth to respond but found no words. He looked at the broken hull of the Eternal Defiance. Still hanging in space, still refusing to move, still positioned between his fleet and Miral Prime. One armed ship had done this. One human admiral had changed the galaxy not with weapons, but with willingness to die for strangers. Commander, his tactical officer said quietly, "We are surrounded. If we engage, we will be destroyed. Our reinforcements are 6 days away. What are your orders?" Dexel stood silent for a long moment as the weight of his situation settled upon him. The Vareth had conquered 47 species through superior firepower and ruthless determination. They had never faced a coalition like this. They had never imagined that such a coalition was possible. "All ships," he said finally, "withdraw. Set course for Dominion space. Maximum speed." His officers complied with obvious relief, and the Varth fleet turned away from Miral Prime as they engaged their hyperspace drives. Dexel took one last look at the human vessel. Admiral Kang Doyen's face appeared on his screen one final time. "Commander Dexel." Diane said, "Thank you." Dexel did not understand. "Thank me for what?" he demanded. "I was going to kill you. I was going to destroy your ship and murder everyone aboard. What possible reason do you have to thank me?" Doyen's expression held no anger, no hatred, no triumph, only peace. "You gave the galaxy a chance to remember who they wanted to be," he said. "You gave them a villain to stand against and a cause to stand for. You reminded them that some things are worth fighting for. For that, I thank you." The transmission ended, and the Vorth fleet vanished into hyperspace on the bridge of the Eternal Defiance. Admiral Kandoyan finally allowed himself to sit down. His legs would no longer support him, and his vision was blurring from blood loss and exhaustion. But he was smiling. 310 ships surrounded his broken vessel like a protective embrace. Medical shuttles were already launching from the Allied fleet, carrying doctors and supplies to treat the wounded. Ambassador Siori's escape pod was recovered by a Thesan cruiser, and she demanded to be brought to Doyen immediately. When she arrived on the shattered bridge, she found him sitting in his command chair with his eyes closed. For a terrible moment, she thought he was dead. Then he opened his eyes and saw her standing before him. "Ambassador," he said weakly, "you were supposed to stay away. You were supposed to survive and tell the story." Siori knelt beside his chair and took his hand in hers. "The story is not finished yet," she said, "and I will not tell it until I can tell them how it ends." "How does it end, Admiral? With your death? Or with something better?" Dion looked around at his surviving crew, at the Allied ships visible through the cracked viewports, at the stars that had witnessed humanity's finest hour. "It ends with the beginning," he said. "It ends with the galaxy remembering what it means to stand together. It ends with the Varth learning that there are some things they cannot conquer. It ends with hope." He closed his eyes again, and Siori feared the worst, but he was only resting. The medical teams arrived and began treating the wounded. The Allied fleet formed an honor guard around the Eternal Defiance and escorted her home. The Galactic Council quietly updated their assessment of humanity's strategic value from negligible to incalculable, and Ambassador Siori kept her promise. She told the story to everyone who would listen. She told them about a human admiral who gave his last starship to save strangers. She told them about a crew that refused to abandon their post even when death was certain. She told them about 310 warships that arrived because one man reminded the galaxy what kindness could accomplish, and she told them what Admiral Kang Doyen's grandmother had always said: kindness is never wasted. Sometimes it just takes a while to come home. The broadcast reached every corner of the galaxy at the speed of light, and news drones from a dozen neutral species carried images that would change the course of interstellar history on the Corvani homeworld. High Admiral Zeth watched the footage with tears forming in his 4 eyes. He remembered a time 40 years ago when a mysterious plague had swept through Corvani space and killed millions. No one had come to help except for a single human medical ship that had crossed 3 sectors to bring doctors and medicine. The Corvani government had offered payment, and the human captain had refused. "We do not charge for mercy," The captain had said, "We only ask that someday, when you see someone in need, you remember what we did here." Zeth had been a young officer then, and he had never forgotten those words. Now he watched a human ship burn in defense of strangers, and he felt shame crawling through his soul like poison. He reached for his communication console and contacted the Corvani Fleet Command. All available vessels. He ordered, "Set course for the Marl system. Maximum speed. We move now on the Thesan orbital stations." Chief Engineer Vorna watched the same broadcast with her tentacles coiled tight around her workstation. She remembered when solar flares had devastated the Thesan power grid and left billions without heat or light. UN engineers had arrived within days and worked for months rebuilding what had been destroyed. They had asked for nothing in return except friendship. Vorna had been a young apprentice then, and she had learned her craft from human teachers who had shared their knowledge freely. Now she watched humans dying for people they had never met, and she felt something break inside her heart. She contacted the Thesan Defense Council with urgent priority codes. "We cannot watch this," she said. "We cannot stand by while humans sacrifice themselves for others. I am requesting authorization to mobilize our fleet." The council debated for 11 minutes, and then authorization came. Thesan warships began launching from their orbital docks. On the Bryn homeworld, Ambassador Tarek watched the broadcast with his advisors gathered around him. The Bryn had nearly destroyed themselves in a civil war that lasted 3 generations. Human negotiators had brokered the peace that saved their species from extinction. Those negotiators had spent years learning Bryn culture and language and customs. They had treated both sides with respect and patience, and had never given up even when violence flared again and again. The current peace had held for 50 years. Because of human determination, Tarek looked at his advisors and saw the same thought reflected in every face. "Contact our military," he said. "Tell them we are going to war. Not against anyone. For someone. For the humans who saved us when we could not save ourselves. Across the galaxy." Species great and small watched the broadcast and remembered. The Yenari remembered. Human explorers who had shared star charts freely. The Koth remembered human traders who had given fair prices when others would have cheated them. The Malachi remembered human diplomats who had spoken for them at the Galactic Council when no one else would. 100 kindnesses given over a century of human expansion into the stars. 100 debts that had never been called due. 100 species who had forgotten they owed anything until they saw a human ship burning in defense of strangers' ships launched from dozens of worlds. Old vessels pulled from retirement and new cruisers diverted from patrol routes. Military warships and armed merchant vessels and converted cargo haulers fitted with weapons. They did not coordinate with each other because there was no time for coordination. They did not ask permission from the Galactic Council because the Council had already proven its worthlessness. They simply went on Earth. Admiral Yun Sharan commanded the Home Defense Fleet and watched incoming transmissions with growing disbelief. First came encrypted messages from the Corvani announcing their mobilization. Then the Thesan contacted her with the same news. Then the Brem and the Yenari and the Koth and species she had never heard of her. Communications officer turned to her with wide eyes. "Admiral, we are receiving mobilization notices from 37 different species," he reported. "They are all converging on the Miral system. They say they are coming to help." Sharon felt her legs weaken, and she gripped her command chair for support. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would they do this?" Her executive officer pointed at the main display, where the broadcast still showed the burning hull of the Eternal Defiance. "Because of him," she said. "Because Admiral Doyan showed them who we are. Because he reminded them of who they used to be. On the shattered bridge of the Eternal Defiance." Admiral Kan Doyan knew none of this. He knew only that his ship was dying and that his crew was dying, and that the evacuation was 97% complete. 3% remaining, maybe 100. Merrill families still waiting for shuttles that might never reach them. Status report. He called out through the smoke and sparks. Commander Yu answered from the engineering station where he had taken over for 3 dead officers. Shields gone. Admiral. Hull breaches on decks 4 through 9. Weapons, well, we never had those. Anyway, life support holding in the core sections, only engines at 12%. But we are still here. We are still between them and Miral Prime. Dion nodded and tasted blood in his mouth from a cut on his lip. Good enough, he said. Hold position. Dexel's face appeared on what remained of the communication screen. The Varth commander no longer looked amused or angry. He looked tired. You have impressed me. Human, he said. I did not think that was possible. Your ship is finished. Your shields are gone. One more volley, and there will be nothing left but debris. But I offer you this final chance to surrender. You have earned that much. Dion straightened his torn uniform and faced the enemy with dignity. Commander Dexel, I thank you for the offer, he said, but I must decline. We have not finished our mission. 3% of the Miral evacuation remains incomplete. Until that changes, we will not move. Dexel stared at him for a long moment. You would die. For 3%? He asked. 3% of a species that is not your own? 3% that you will never meet. Never know? Never receive gratitude from? What kind of madness is this? Dion smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had found peace with his own death. It is not madness, he said. It is humanity. It is who we are. It is who we choose to be. Dexel shook his head slowly. Then you have chosen death, he said. All ships, prepare final barrage. Target the human vessel. Fire on my command. The Varth fleet powered up their weapons for the killing blow. Dion looked at his surviving crew and saw no fear in their faces, only pride, only certainty, only love. It has been an honor, he said. The greatest honor of my life. Lieutenant Park smiled through her tears. See you on the other side, Admiral. Dion nodded and turned to face the enemy. One last time, he had no regrets. He had done what his grandmother would have wanted. He had been the help that never came. He had shown the galaxy that humanity would stand for others, even when no one stood for them. And that was enough. That was everything, Commander Dexel. He said, do your worst. We are ready. The eternal defiance burned in the void of space like a dying star that refused to fade. Chief Engineer Beak. Minho had not slept in 36 hours, and his hands were black with plasma burns, and his uniform was torn in a dozen places from crawling through damaged conduits, but he kept the ship alive through sheer will and desperate innovation. Reroute auxiliary power from Deck 7. He shouted to his team as another explosion shook the engineering section. Seal bulkheads 12 through 15. Get me more power to the forward shields, or we lose the bridge. A young engineer named Quan Yuna worked beside him with blood running down her face from a cut above her eye. She did not stop to wipe it away, because stopping meant dying, and dying meant failing the thousands of Miral refugees huddled in the cargo bays below. Chief, the port shield generator is failing, she reported. We have maybe 10 minutes before it collapses completely. Minho made a decision in that moment that would have seemed insane under any other circumstances. Transfer power from life support on the empty decks. He ordered, we do not need air in sections where no one is breathing. Channel everything to shields, everything, on the bridge. Admiral Kang Doyun watched the damage reports scroll across his console and felt each wound to his ship as if it were a wound to his own body. The Eternal Defiance had been his home for 15 years. He had walked her corridors as a young captain and grown old with her as an admiral. Now she was dying, and he could do nothing except ask her to die slowly. Evacuation status. He called out 82% complete. Lieutenant Park replied, shuttles are running continuous cycles. But Admiral, We have lost contact with Shuttle Bay 3. The whole breach may have. She stopped speaking as another missile impact threw her from her chair. Commander Yu helped her up, and she returned to her station without complaint across the galaxy. News drones from neutral species broadcast the battle to billions of viewers. The footage showed something that many had never seen before: a single unarmed ship absorbing fire from an entire fleet, not fighting back, not retreating, simply existing. As a barrier between the attackers and the helpless, the Vorath had conquered 47 species and destroyed countless worlds, but they had never faced anything like this. They had never faced someone who refused to play by the rules of power. Commander Dexel watched the human ship continue to take damage and felt his confusion transform into rage. Why will they not die? He demanded of his officers. Why will they not break? Increase fire. I want that ship reduced to atoms, his subordinates exchanged uncertain glances, but obeyed. The Vorath fleet concentrated its weapons on the Eternal Defiance, and the ship groaned under the assault like a living creature, crying out in pain on the bridge. A support beam collapsed and killed the navigation officer instantly. Doyun did not have time to mourn. Someone take navigation, he ordered. Maintain our position. We do not move. Ambassador Siori had refused to evacuate with her people, and now she crouched behind a damaged console watching humans die for her species. She saw crew members dragging their wounded comrades to safety while continuing their duties. She saw young officers stepping into the roles of dead superiors without hesitation. She saw Admiral Doyen standing at the center of the chaos like a rock in a storm. Calm and steady, an absolutely certain admiral, she said, her voice breaking. The evacuation is 87% complete. Please, you have done enough. You have done more than anyone could ask. Order the retreat. Save yourself and your crew. Doyun turned to look at her, and his face was covered in soot and blood, but his eyes were still bright. My grandmother told me a story once, he said. During the Cygnus Plague, a human doctor named Chen Wei stayed on a colony world after everyone else evacuated. She had enough medicine to save maybe 100 people. The colony had 10,000 infected. Her colleagues told her to take the 100 she could save and leave. Do you know what she did? Siori shook her head. She stayed. Diane said she treated patients one by one, day after day, knowing she could not save them all. She stayed until the last patient either recovered or died, and then she stayed longer to bury them. When rescue ships finally arrived, they found her still working. She had saved 4,000 people through sheer determination and refusal to give up. Another explosion rocked the bridge, and Doyen grabbed Saori to steady her. I will not leave until every Miral who wants to leave is aboard, he said. Not one will be left behind while this ship still holds together. That is not negotiable. Lieutenant Park's voice cut through the chaos. Admiral, evacuation at 93%. But sir, forward shields are failing. We cannot take much more. Dexel's face appeared on the communication screen again, and this time his expression showed something new, not anger or amusement, but genuine bewilderment. Why? He demanded. Why do you continue? You cannot win. You cannot even hurt us. What do you hope to achieve? Diane faced the Vorath commander with blood running down his face and fire burning behind him. I hope to show the galaxy that there is still good in the universe, he said. I hope to prove that strength is not measured by how many you can kill, but by how many you are willing to die for. I hope that somewhere out there, someone is watching and remembering what it means to stand for something. Dexel stared at him for a long moment. You are insane, he said finally. All of you humans are insane. I will enjoy destroying you. All ships, concentrate fire. I want this ended now. The Vorath fleet unleashed everything they had, and they Eternal Defiance shuddered as her shields collapsed entirely. The first direct hits tore through the outer hull, and atmosphere began venting into space. Doyen gave the order he had hoped to avoid. All non-essential personnel to escape pods. He commanded. Skeleton crew only. We hold the line as long as we can. Ambassador Shiori felt human hands pushing her toward an escape pod, and she fought against them. No, she cried. I will not leave. I will not abandon you. Doyen appeared before her, and his voice was gentle but firm. Ambassador, you must survive, he said. You must tell your people what happened here. You must tell the galaxy that humanity stood with you when no one else would. That is how we win. Not with weapons, with memory, with story, with the truth of who we are. He placed his hand on her shoulder, and she felt the warmth of it through her thin robes. Someone has to remember us. He said, Will you do that for me? Shiori could not speak. She could only nod as tears streamed down her blue face. Doyen smiled and guided her into the escape pod. Thank you, Ambassador. Now go. Lev, remember. The pod launched and Shiori watched. Through the small viewport as the Eternal Defiance continued to burn, and still the human ship did not move, and still the human crew worked at their stations, and still Admiral Kan Doyen stood on his bridge waiting for death. The galaxy watched and wondered what madness drove these strange creatures called humans. But some who watched were beginning to understand that it was not madness at all. It was something far more dangerous to the established order of things. It was love. Admiral Kan Doyen stood on the bridge of the HSS Eternal Defiance and stared at the holographic map that showed humanity's shrinking territory in the galaxy. 12 ships remained under his command. Just 12 vessels stood between Earth and the Varth Dominion, an empire that had conquered 47 species. Across 3 centuries of brutal expansion, the Varth did not negotiate, and they did not show mercy, and they did not stop until every world they touched belonged to them. Doyen had watched Colony. After Colony falls silent over the past 2 years, New Shanghai went dark first. Then the mining stations of Kepler Prime, then the agricultural world of Haven, where his sister had raised her children. He never learned what happened to her family, the Varth. Did not take prisoners, and they did not answer questions. His communications officer, Lieutenant Park Hyman, turned from her console with a troubled expression on her young face. Admiral, we are receiving an encrypted transmission on the humanitarian frequency, she said. It carries the identification codes of the Mirror Collective. Doyen frowned at this unexpected contact. The Mirror were a peaceful federation of 7 species who lived on the far side of the galaxy from human space. They had never shown interest in humanity, and humanity had never had reason to reach out. To them, put it through. He ordered. The holographic display flickered, and a face appeared that Doyen had never seen before. The Mirror ambassador had pale blue skin and large, dark eyes that seemed to hold infinite sadness within them. Thin tendrils extended from her. Scalp-like hair made of silk, and her voice carried a musical quality even through the distortion of long-range communication. I am Ambassador Shiori of the Mirror Collective, she said. I speak to you today, not as a diplomat, but as a mother begging for the lives of her children. She paused, and Doyen could see tears forming in those enormous dark eyes. The Varth have destroyed our fleet, she continued. Every warship we possessed was lost defending our outer colonies, and now their invasion force approaches our homeworld. We have contacted the Galactic Council and pleaded for intervention, but they have refused. They say we hold no strategic value and that helping us would provoke the Varth into wider conflict. Doyen felt a cold weight settle in his chest as he listened to her words. He knew exactly what the Council's refusal meant because he had heard the same excuses when humanity begged for help during the Cygnus Plague 30 years ago. Millions of humans had died while the galaxy watched and did nothing. We do not ask you to fight for us, Ambassador Shiori said. We know humanity faces its own struggle against the Dominion. We ask only for transport ships to evacuate our children and our elderly. We ask for a chance to save our future, even as we accept that we ourselves will die. Please. Admiral, we have nowhere else to turn. The transmission ended and silence filled the bridge of the Eternal Defiance. Doyne's officers exchanged glances, but no one spoke, because everyone knew the impossible mathematics of their situation. 12 ships to defend Earth and her remaining colonies. 0 ships to spare for a species on the other side of the galaxy. Commander Yu Sung-ho, his executive officer, stepped forward with reluctance, showing in every line of his weathered face. Admiral, I understand your heart, but we cannot do this, he said quietly. If we send even one vessel to help the Miral, we weaken our own defense. The Varth could strike Earth while our forces are divided. Our duty is to our own people first. Doyoon did not respond immediately. Instead, he walked to the observation window and stared out at the stars that had witnessed so much suffering and so much silence. He thought about his grandmother, who had told him stories of the Cygnus plague when he was a boy. She had survived, but her parents and her brothers and her first husband had not. Do you know what my grandmother said to me before she died? Diane asked without turning around. She said the galaxy taught humanity a terrible lesson during the plague. She said we learned that no one would help us and that we could only rely on ourselves. He turned to face his officers and his eyes held a fire that made younger crew members straighten unconsciously. But she also told me something else. He continued. She said we had a choice about what kind of species we would become. We could become like the galaxy that abandoned us, cold and calculating and concerned only with our own survival. Or we could become something better. We could become the help that never came. Commander Yu shook his head with genuine anguish in his expression. Admiral, I honor your grandmother's wisdom, but we are not strong enough to save everyone, he said. We barely have enough ships to save ourselves. What can one vessel do against the Vorth invasion fleet? Diane smiled, and it was a sad smile, but also somehow peaceful. One vessel can show the galaxy what humanity believes in. He said, one vessel can stand between the helpless and the destroyer, even when there is no hope of victory. One vessel can remind the universe that some things matter more than survival. He walked to the command console and entered his personal authorization codes. I am ordering the Eternal Defiance to be converted for refugee transport. He announced all weapon systems will be removed to make room for evacuation pods and life support capacity. This ship will travel to Miral Prime, and we will save as many of their people as we can carry. Gasps echoed across the bridge, and Doyoon raised his hand to forestall the objections he knew were coming. I am not ordering anyone to join me, he said. This is a volunteer mission only. Those who wish to transfer to other vessels may do so without any mark against their records. I will pilot this ship alone if I must. For a long moment, no one moved and no one spoke. Then Lieutenant Park Hyemin rose from her communication station and saluted with tears streaming down her face. I volunteer. Admiral, she said. Commander Yu closed his eyes, and when he opened them again, his expression had changed from reluctance to resolve. If you are determined to do this foolish thing, then I will not let you do it alone, he said. Someone has to keep you from getting killed before you reach Miral space. One by one. Every officer on the bridge stood and volunteered. Word spread through the ship, and within an hour every single crew member had requested to remain aboard. Doyoon felt his throat tighten with emotion he could not fully express. Thank you, he said. Simply, thank you all. He opened a channel to the Miral frequency and waited until Ambassador Seori's face appeared again. Ambassador. This is Admiral Kang Doyoon of the HSS Eternal Defiance, he said. We are coming. Begin preparing your people for evacuation. We will arrive in 6 days. Ambassador Seori stared at him as if she could not believe what she was hearing. You will come? She whispered. But your fleet cannot spare a ship, and the Varth will certainly destroy anyone who interferes. Why would you do this? Dion thought of his grandmother and of the millions who died waiting for help that never came. Because 30 years ago, humanity learned what it feels like to be abandoned by the galaxy. He said, "We will not do to others what was done to us." Hold on, Ambassador. Help is coming. The transmission ended, and Doyon turned to his crew. "Begin the conversion," he ordered. "We have a lot of work to do, and very little time to do it," as his officers rushed to carry out his commands. Admiral Kang Doyon allowed himself one quiet moment at the observation window. The stars looked the same as they always had, cold and distant and uncaring. But humanity would be different. Humanity would be the light in the darkness. The hand extended to the fallen. The voice that answered when all others stayed silent, even if it cost them everything. The SS Eternal Defiance dropped out of hyperspace above Miral Prime, and Ambassador Siori felt her heart stop at the sight of the human vessel. She had expected cargo transports, perhaps civilian ships hastily converted for rescue operations. Instead, she saw a warship, one of humanity's proud military cruisers, its hull scarred from previous battles and its frame radiating quiet strength. But something was wrong with the ship. The weapon mounts that should have bristled along its hull were empty, and the torpedo bays had been sealed with fresh metal plates, and the energy weapon ports had been removed entirely. "What happened to your weapons?" Siori asked when Admiral Kang Doyon appeared on her communication screen. His face showed exhaustion from the 6-day journey, but his eyes remained bright with purpose. "We removed them," he said simply. "We needed the space and the power reserves for life support systems. This ship can now carry 3,000 passengers in reasonable comfort, or 5,000 if we pack them tightly." Siori could not comprehend what she was hearing. "You stripped your warship of its defenses?" She said, "Admiral, the Varth scouts have already appeared at the edge of our system. Their invasion fleet will arrive within 2 days. How will you protect yourself? How will you protect us?" Dion smiled, and there was something in that smile that Siori had never seen in any alien species before. It was not confidence, because he clearly understood the danger they faced. It was not ignorance, because his intelligence reports were probably better than her own. It was something else entirely. Something she would later describe to her people as the human capacity for hope in hopeless situations. "We will not fight," he said. "We will simply refuse to move. Ambassador, please begin the evacuation immediately. We have very little time." Within hours, the surface of Miral Prime transformed into organized chaos as Bizdeen. Siori's people prepared to abandon their homeworld forever. Children were gathered from schools and homes and brought to the evacuation sites where human crew members waited to carry them aboard shuttles. Elderly Morel who could not walk were lifted gently by human arms and settled into medical bays that had been hastily constructed in what were once weapons storage rooms. Doyon himself came down to the surface, and Siori watched him work alongside his crew without any regard for his rank or dignity. He carried frightened children on his shoulders, and he held the hands of dying elders, and he spoke soft words of comfort in a language the Miral could not understand, but somehow felt in their hearts. "You are not what I expected humans to be," Siori told him during a brief rest period. "The galaxy speaks of your species as survivors, as fighters who claw their way through any obstacle. They say humans are dangerous because you never give up." Doyon wiped sweat from his forehead and looked at the family streaming toward the evacuation shuttles. "We are survivors," he agreed. "But surviving is not the same as living. My people learned long ago that a species that survives by abandoning others does not deserve to survive at all." A warning siren cut through their conversation, and Lieutenant Park Hyman's voice crackled over Doyon's communicator. "Admiral, Vorith Advance Fleet has entered the system. She reported, 23 vessels approaching at combat speed. Commander Dexel is hailing us. Diane nodded to Sayori, and they rushed to the nearest shuttle to return to the Eternal Defiance on the bridge. The holographic display showed the approaching Vorth ships like a swarm of predators closing in on wounded prey. Commander Dexel's face appeared on the communication screen, and Sayori felt her blood turn cold at the sight of him, the Vorth. Commander had gray-mottled skin and 4 eyes arranged in a diamond pattern on his flat face. His mouth was filled with small, sharp teeth, and when he spoke, his voice carried the casual cruelty of someone who had never known defeat. One ship? Dexel said with obvious amusement. The humans sent one ship to save an entire world. I almost admire the stupidity of it. Admiral Kang Doyan, I know your name. I know your reputation as a warrior. I offer you this chance to leave. Take your ship and go home. The Meryl are not your concern. There is no logic in dying for a species that shares nothing with your own. Dion stood perfectly still, and his voice was calm when he responded, Commander Dexel, the Meryl are under the protection of humanity, he said. This vessel is engaged in humanitarian evacuation operations. Under the Galactic Convention on Protected Persons, you are required to allow safe passage for refugees and medical ships. Dexel's 4 eyes blinked in sequence, and then he laughed. A harsh barking sound that echoed through the bridge speakers. The Vorth Dominion does not recognize your conventions, he said. We recognize only strength. And you, Admiral, have no strength. Your weapons are gone. Your ship is alone. You have nothing but words. Move aside or be destroyed. Diane glanced at his crew, and every face showed fear, but also something stronger than fear. He looked at Ambassador Sayori and saw tears falling from her enormous dark eyes. Then he turned back to Dexel, and his expression hardened into something that made the Vorth commander's amusement falter. I will not move. Diane said, You will have to destroy me. And while you are destroying me, my crew will continue the evacuation. Every minute you spend on this ship is another minute for Heinreist, Meryl families to escape. Every shot you fire at me is a shot not fired at defenseless civilians. So go ahead. Commander, fire your weapons. Show the galaxy what the Vorth truly are. Sayori realized suddenly that this was Doyan's plan all along. He had never intended to fight. He had never intended to win. He had intended only to buy time with the one. Currency he had left to spend his own life. The evacuation is 60% complete. Lieutenant Park reported quietly. At current pace, we need 4 more hours. Dexel's face twisted with anger at Doyan's defiance. You think you can shame me? He snarled. You think the galaxy's opinion matters to the Dominion? We have conquered 47 species. We will conquer 48. Your gesture changes nothing. All weapons. Fire at will. The first missile streaked toward the Eternal Defiance, and Doyan gave his orders with absolute calm. All power to shields. Maintain position between the Vorth fleet and Meryl Prime. Continue evacuation operations. No one stops working. No one panics. We hold the line. The ship shuddered as explosions rocked the hull, and Sayori grabbed the console to keep from falling. She looked at the human crew around her and saw them working at their stations as if this were any ordinary day, as if death were not raining down upon them from the stars. Why? She whispered to Diane as another impact threw sparks across the bridge. Why would you die for us? Diane steadied her with one hand while issuing orders with the other. Because someone has to be first, he said. Someone has to show the galaxy that there is another way. If not us, then who? If not now, then when? The Eternal Defiance continued to absorb punishment that should have destroyed it 10 times over, and the evacuation continued. And humanity showed the universe what it meant to stand for something greater than survival.